Marcus had only meant to buy a few things. That was the funny part. He stepped into the supermarket in Melbourne with the kind of relaxed confidence people have when they think they already understand how this is going to go. Grocery shopping was grocery shopping, right? You grab a basket, walk the aisles, complain quietly about prices, pick a few snacks, and leave. Easy. He slowed down just inside the entrance and looked around. Okay, he muttered, half smiling. This is basically home. The store didn't look strange at first. Bright lights, stacked fruit, chilled drinks, end caps filled with sale tags, a bakery section near the front, a coffee kiosk off to one side. Everything about it felt familiar enough that his brain stopped paying close attention. Then he picked up a basket and paused. Trolley this way? He looked at the sign again and laughed softly. Right. Trolley. A woman walking past heard him and smiled. You okay there? Yeah, Marcus said, grinning. Marcus, just translating English into other English. She laughed. You'll be right. That phrase landed in his head for a second. You'll be right. Calm. Casual. Like she hadn't even considered the possibility that he wouldn't be. He wandered into produce first. The apples looked normal. Bananas, oranges, avocados, all familiar. Then he noticed a handwritten sign above a stack of peppers. Capsicum. He stopped. Wait. What? He picked one up, turned it in his hand, then looked around like maybe another sign would appear and explain itself. A store worker nearby was arranging tomatoes. Marcus held up the pepper. Sorry, this is a bell pepper, right? The worker nodded. Yeah, capsicum. Marcus smiled. Huh, okay. So that's just what you call it? Yep. Got it, capsicum. He repeated it like he was testing out a new app. That sounds way more official than pepper. The worker chuckled. You from the States? Is it that obvious? A little. Marcus pushed the basket farther down the aisle, now more alert than before. The words were small differences, but once he noticed one, he started spotting them everywhere. Rocket instead of arugula. Beetroot instead of just beets. Sachets. Biscuits. Yogurt spelled with an extra U. He whispered, why does all of this feel like English with a secret second setting? He turned into the snack aisle and immediately slowed again. Tim Tams, shapes, tiny teddies. Arnott's biscuits lined up in neat rows. No way, he murmured, reaching for a package. These are cookies. Those are absolutely cookies. An older man beside him glanced over. Nah, mate. Biscuits. Marcus held up the pack. Even these? Especially those. Marcus laughed. Wow. Okay, I'm losing ground fast. The man gave him an amused nod and rolled his trolley away. At first, it all felt charming. That was the word Marcus would have used if anyone had asked. Charming. Light. A fun little reminder that he wasn't home, even if everything looked like it should work the same way. But beneath that was another feeling too. Quieter and slower. He was realizing how much of daily life depended on not having to think. Back home, he could drift through a store half distracted and still know exactly what things meant, where they belonged, how people moved, what kind of conversation happened at the checkout, even what counted as normal hesitation and what looked awkward. Here, nothing was dramatic. No one was rude, no one was staring at him. But every shelf seemed to ask for one extra second of interpretation. He stopped by the refrigerated section and frowned at a label. Free-range eggs, full cream milk, long-life milk. He picked up one carton, then another. Wait, long-life milk? A young woman next to him heard that and smiled. It's just shelf-stable. Marcus looked relieved. Thank you. I thought this milk had some kind of superpower. She laughed. Honestly, that would be more exciting. He laughed too, then placed the carton in his basket. By the time he reached the middle of the store, the trip had quietly changed. He was no longer just shopping. He was decoding. Still casually. Still with a smile. But more carefully now. The supermarket had stopped feeling like a neutral place. It was starting to feel like a cultural map written in ordinary objects. And Marcus, who had walked in expecting a quick and forgettable errand, was beginning to suspect that one normal afternoon in an Australian store might tell him a lot more about the country than he had planned to learn. By the time Marcus turned into the next aisle, he had stopped pretending the differences were random. At first it had been funny. Capsicum, biscuits, long-life milk, little language detours. But now the whole store felt like it was operating on a version of logic that was close enough to be familiar and different enough to keep tripping him. Not in a dramatic way, more like walking down a staircase and expecting one more step that never comes. He stopped in front of a refrigerated case and stared at row after row of packaged meat. Sausages, mince, lamb chops. Then he blinked. Wait. Mince? A middle-aged employee in a green apron was refilling a shelf nearby. Marcus picked up a package and held it slightly in the air. Sorry, is this ground beef? The employee nodded. Yeah, beef mince. Marcus let out a quiet laugh. Okay, so you call it mince. Good to know. The man shrugged with a smile. Keeps life interesting. Marcus grinned. Apparently that's the theme today. He dropped the mince into his basket and kept going, now reading almost everything out loud under his breath like he was studying for a test. Full cream, light tasty cheese, tomato sauce. He froze again and leaned closer to the shelf. No, hold on. Tomato sauce? A woman reaching for pasta nearby glanced over. Yeah? Marcus held up the bottle. This is ketchup, right? She smiled immediately, like she had heard this before. Pretty much. Pretty much? It's tomato sauce. Marcus stared at the bottle, then laughed. You all really looked at regular groceries and said, let's rename everything just enough to make tourists doubt themselves. She laughed. You from America? Yeah. Is it written on my face? A little. Also, you said regular groceries like you're emotionally attached to them. Fair. He put the bottle back, then picked it up again. I feel like if I buy this, I'm committing to the bit. You should, she said. Go all in. He tossed it into the basket. That was the thing. Nothing was unreadable. Nothing was impossible. But every small difference asked for a decision. And decisions were tiring when you thought you were supposed to be on autopilot. In the cereal aisle, he found another round of surprises. Wheat Bix, he read. Okay, I've heard of that. Then his eyes moved lower. Milo cereal. Nutrigrain. Sultanas. He frowned. Sultanas are raisins, right? A teenage stock clerk pushing boxes looked over. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much is doing a lot of work in this country, Marcus muttered. The clerk laughed. You'll get used to it. Marcus nodded. That's what I'm afraid of. He moved on. Near the frozen section, he found meat pies, sausage rolls, party pies, and something labeled family pack that looked less like a shopping item and more like an unofficial national institution. He leaned forward and read the prices carefully. Then he looked at another label below. $7.50 per kilo, then another. $14. 0 hour per kilo. He said quietly, Whoa, wait. Back home, he was used to seeing pounds, ounces, package totals, all the usual shortcuts his brain barely noticed anymore. Here, the numbers were metric, which meant he kept doing these awkward mental conversions that were probably wrong. He took out his phone and opened the calculator. Okay, 1 kilogram is 2 pounds. So this is... He stared at the screen, then looked back at the package. I have no idea if this is expensive or not. A man beside him reached into the freezer and said, First week here? Marcus looked up. That obvious? The guy laughed. You're doing math in front of the pies. Marcus looked at the phone in his hand. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out whether I'm getting a deal or being politely robbed. Nah, that's normal enough. Normal enough? That doesn't sound reassuring. The man shrugged. Stuff's expensive. Depends what you're after. Marcus nodded slowly. See, that I understand. Grocery inflation is international. Now you're speaking the language, the man said, and walked off. Marcus smiled, but he noticed something in that moment. Every conversation in the store had the same tone. Nobody seemed in a rush to over-explain. Nobody gave him a long speech or acted like they were rescuing a confused outsider. They just answered, lightly, casually, Like the differences were not really a big deal, and he'd figure them out soon enough. That ease made the confusion feel even more interesting. He headed toward the health and household aisles, expecting a break from translation. Instead, he found more of it. Serviettes, he read. Okay, napkins. Then, tea towels. He picked one up. This is a dish towel. Definitely a dish towel. A woman walking past with 2 kids heard him and smiled. Tea towel. Marcus held it up. You all really love specific names. She laughed. We do all right. One of the kids looked up at him and asked, Are you lost? Marcus laughed out loud. Emotionally? A little. The mother smiled and kept walking. In the toiletries aisle, he saw sunscreen with giant warnings about UV, insect repellent on half an end cap, and a long stretch of products that looked more practical than glamorous. And that caught his attention too. The whole store felt built around usefulness. Less dramatic packaging, fewer giant novelty sizes. Less of that loud, hyper-optimized American retail energy pushing 10 versions of the same thing with huge signs screaming about savings. Even the sale tag seemed calmer. Not small exactly, just less aggressive. He reached for a bottle of water and noticed another price card. The cents were written smaller. Specials were marked clearly, but without the frantic tone he was used to. No giant walls of buy more, save more urgency. No cashier voice echoing in his memory about loyalty rewards, digital coupons, limited time member pricing, points multipliers, bonus offers, and whatever else usually turned a quick grocery trip back home into a strategy game. He actually stopped and looked around because that feeling had been building for 10 minutes without him naming it. This place is quieter, he said to himself. Not literally. Carts rattled, people talked, registers beeped, but socially quieter, commercially quieter. The whole experience seemed to assume that shoppers could just come in, buy what they needed, and leave without being pulled into 1,000 little promotional negotiations. That realization stayed with him as he moved into another aisle. He picked up a box of crackers, then checked the shelf below for the larger family size version. There wasn't one. He scanned farther along. Still nothing. He looked at another brand. Same thing. Reasonable box. Normal size. No massive warehouse-style pack trying to convince him to buy snacks like he was provisioning a bunker. A store assistant stocking canned goods noticed him glancing around and asked, Need a hand? Marcus lifted the box. Do you have the bigger size? She looked at it. That is the bigger size. He laughed. Seriously? Yeah. Marcus turned the box over in his hand. Wow. Okay. In the US, this would be the medium pretending not to be the small. She smiled. Maybe we just stop earlier. That line sat in his mind for a second. Maybe we just stop earlier. It was about crackers, sure, but it didn't sound like it was only about crackers. He nodded. That might be the most educational thing anyone has said to me today. She laughed, gave a little wave, and returned to stocking shelves. Marcus stood there with the box in his hand, realizing the confusion was changing shape. At the beginning, it had been mostly about words, then prices, then labels. But now another thought was creeping in. It wasn't just that Australians called things by different names. It was that the whole shopping environment seemed to reflect different assumptions about how much people bought, how much choice they needed, how loudly stores should try to sell to them, and how much performance surrounded an ordinary errand. And Marcus, somewhere between the tea towels and the crackers, had started to realize that this was no longer just a funny vocabulary lesson. It was turning into something else. A slow recognition that even a normal supermarket could reveal the personality of a place, one small label at a time. By the time Marcus reached the checkout area, his basket looked less like a plan and more like evidence. Tomato sauce, biscuits, a box of crackers that apparently counted as the large size, a carton of long-life milk he still didn't fully trust, some fruit, a frozen meat pie, tea towels he absolutely did not need, and a pack of Tim Tams he had bought mostly because too many people had said the name with confidence for him to walk away without trying them. He slowed as he approached the front of the store and looked from one register to the next. There were only a couple of staffed checkouts open. Most people were moving toward the self-checkout area without hesitation, like it was the obvious choice. No one seemed annoyed about it. No one was dramatically sighing. No one was waiting around hoping a cashier would save them from scanning their own groceries. Marcus shifted the basket to his other hand and watched for a second. A woman in front of him rolled her trolley toward a self-checkout, scanned a few items, packed them quickly, tapped her card, and left in what felt like under a minute. "Huh," he said quietly. "Efficient." He stepped into the self-checkout line. At first it felt normal enough. The screen lit up. He placed the basket down. The machine told him to scan his first item. Easy. He picked up the tomato sauce, found the barcode, and passed it over the scanner. Beep. "Okay," he said. "We're in business." He scanned the Tim Tams. Beep. Then the tea towels. Beep. So far, so good. Then he picked up the apples. He looked at the screen. No barcode, obviously. He tapped produce. A list of categories appeared. Fruit, vegetables, bakery. He tapped fruit, then stared at a long menu that might as well have been a small exam. Royal Gala, Pink Lady, Granny Smith, Granny, Jazz, Kanzi. Marcus looked down at the apples in his bag, then back at the screen. Wait, no, come on. He turned one apple in his hand as if the answer might be written somewhere on the skin. The woman at the checkout station 2 spaces down glanced over, smiled slightly, then went back to scanning. Marcus whispered, "You are an apple. Why do you need a full identity?" He chose one that sounded familiar enough and placed the bag on the scale. The machine paused. Unexpected item in bagging area. Marcus froze. He slowly looked at the screen. No, it's not unexpected. We literally just talked about this. The machine repeated itself. Unexpected item in bagging area. A red light blinked above the station. Marcus exhaled and stepped back. Amazing. A staff member overseeing the self-checkout area started walking toward him. She looked calm, not rushed, like this happened every 10 seconds. "You all right?" she asked. Marcus laughed once. Apparently not. She glanced at the screen. "What happened?" "I selected apples, placed apples in the bagging area, and the machine has rejected me on a personal level." She smiled. "It does that sometimes." Comforting. She tapped a few buttons on her handheld device. The warning disappeared. "There you go." Marcus nodded. "Thanks. I'm trying to cooperate with the system." "You're doing fine." He smiled. "I appreciate your confidence." She moved away, and Marcus scanned the next few items with more caution, like the machine had established dominance early, and he needed to proceed respectfully. The frozen pie worked, the milk worked, the biscuits worked. Then he picked up the crackers and scanned them. Beep. "Please place item in bagging area." He did. The machine paused again. Unexpected item in bagging area. Marcus stared at it in silence for one long second. Then he looked upward like he was appealing to a higher authority. "Seriously?" The woman at the station beside him laughed under her breath. Marcus turned to her and said, "I'm being challenged by crackers." She smiled. "It's always something silly." The same staff member came back. "That one again?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "The machine and I have creative differences." She cleared the warning with another tap. "Sometimes if you move too quickly, it gets confused." He looked at the screen. "That makes 2 of us." This time she laughed out loud. "First time using these here?" she asked. "First time shopping in Australia, actually." "Ah," she said, and that one syllable carried recognition. "You're doing all right." Marcus scanned the rest more slowly. The final item went through. The total appeared at the bottom of the screen. He looked at it and instinctively reached into his wallet. The woman beside him had already tapped her card and left. The man on the other side used his phone. Marcus pulled out cash, then stopped. The machine had a card terminal front and center. The cash slot was there, technically, but it looked almost decorative. He glanced around. No one else was using bills. He inserted a note anyway. The machine accepted it, but there was a slight pause, just long enough for Marcus to feel old-fashioned in a way he had not expected. He laughed to himself. Wow, okay. As he gathered the change, Another shopper stepped into the next station and immediately began scanning with practiced speed. Beep, bag, tap, gone. Marcus moved to the packing bench nearby to reorganize his things, because he had noticed something else now that he was out of the machine's direct line of fire. Nobody was lingering. Nobody was having long chats with the cashier. Nobody was holding up the line while rearranging coupons or debating loyalty points, or asking if they could split payment 3 different ways. The whole checkout area ran on quiet momentum. People moved with purpose, not rudely, just cleanly, as if the shared agreement was simple. Do what you came to do, don't make it everyone else's problem, and keep things flowing. He started putting items into a reusable bag he had bought near the register after realizing no free plastic bags were waiting for him. That had been another moment. At the start of the transaction, the screen had asked whether he wanted to purchase a bag. He had looked around instinctively, expecting the usual pile of disposable plastic sacks, or at least someone handing them out at the end. Nothing. He had stood there for half a second and said, "Wait. I have to buy the bag too." The staff member had heard him and answered from a few steps away. "Yeah." That was it. Just yeah. Not defensive, not apologetic, just matter of fact, like of course you bring one or buy one. Why wouldn't you? So now Marcus stood at the packing bench, fitting groceries into a reusable bag that was sturdier and nicer than the plastic ones he was used to, even if he had not planned to own it 5 minutes earlier. A man about his age at the next bench noticed him trying to make the crackers sit flat on top of the apples and gave a small grin. "First bagging puzzle?" Marcus laughed. "That obvious?" "A little." Marcus zipped the bag halfway and said, "I think I made 3 separate mistakes in under 10 minutes. The man shrugged. "That's a normal shop." Marcus smiled. "Not where I'm from." The man rested his hands on the cart handle. "What's different?" Marcus thought about that for a second. It's hard to explain. Back home, shopping can feel more assisted, I guess, or more padded. More like the store expects you to need extra convenience at every step. More bags, bigger packs, more people doing parts of it for you, more signs trying to sell you stuff while you're already buying stuff. The man nodded. "Yeah. And here it feels like everybody already knows the drill. Bring a bag, scan fast, pack your own things, keep moving." "Pretty much," the man said. There was that phrase again. "Pretty much." Marcus smiled and leaned against the bench for a second. At first I thought the weirdest part would be the words, like biscuits and capsicum and all that. Fair. But honestly, Marcus said, glancing back at the self-checkouts, this is the part that really got me. It's not just different vocabulary, it's a different attitude. The man gave a small nod. "How do you mean?" Marcus looked around once more. No chaos, no performance, no loud frustration, no one acting like the checkout was a stage where their personal inconvenience became public drama. Just people handling their errands with this low-key competence that seemed to make the whole place run faster without anyone talking about it. He said, "It feels like the system assumes you'll handle your side of things." The man smiled. "Yeah, that sounds about right. And if you don't?" He gave a light shrug. "You learn quick," Marcus laughed. "Apparently I am." The man pushed his trolley forward. "You'll be a local by next week." Marcus nodded toward the self-checkout machines. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm still in an active dispute with one of them." That got a laugh. Then the man rolled away, and Marcus stood there for a moment longer with one hand on the reusable bag, feeling something shift. The checkout had been the first moment all day where the differences were no longer decorative. No longer funny labels or new snack names or spelling changes. This part had required participation. It had asked him to follow the unspoken rules without anyone slowing down the entire process to teach them to him. And somehow that was exactly why it stuck. Because what had embarrassed him wasn't that he made mistakes. It was that everyone else seemed to move through the process with such calm certainty. Not smug, not unkind, just practiced. Like shopping wasn't an event. It wasn't a tiny comfort ritual built around endless consumer choice and convenience layers. It was simply a task. Get what you need. Pay. Pack. Go. Marcus lifted the bag from the bench, surprised by how heavy it felt, and smiled to himself as he headed toward the exit. "Okay," he murmured. Now I get why this isn't just grocery shopping. Then he pushed through the doors and stepped outside, carrying a bag full of snacks, produce, and one slowly forming realization he hadn't expected to pick up at checkout. Marcus had just stepped outside the supermarket when he realized he was standing there like someone who had left a small seminar instead of a grocery store. He shifted the reusable bag higher on his shoulder and looked back through the glass doors. People were still flowing in and out with the same steady rhythm. No drama, no confusion. No one looked like they had just been emotionally corrected by a self-checkout machine. He laughed to himself. All right, I admit it. That was humbling. First Australian grocery run? The voice came from his left. Marcus turned and saw a woman around his age sitting at one of the small outdoor cafe tables attached to the shopping strip. She had an iced coffee, sunglasses pushed up onto her head, and the kind of relaxed posture that suggested she had nowhere urgent to be. He smiled. Is it really that obvious? She nodded toward the bag. You've got the expression. The expression? Yeah, slightly confused, slightly impressed, mildly betrayed by the checkout. Marcus laughed. Okay, wow. That accurate? Pretty common. He walked a little closer, still smiling. Then yes, first one. She pointed to the empty chair at the table beside her. You can sit for a second if you want. You look like you're processing. Marcus hesitated for half a second, then sat down and placed the grocery bag near his feet. I think I actually am processing, he said. I walked in thinking it would be the easiest part of the day. And now I'm leaving with crackers, tea towels, a bag I didn't plan to buy, and a weird sense that I've learned something bigger than what capsicum means. That made her laugh. Yeah, she said. That sounds right. Marcus leaned back in the chair. So what is it? Because I can tell it's not just random differences. It all feels connected somehow. She stirred her drink with the straw and said, It kind of is. See, that's what I thought. He gestured back toward the store. At first I figured it was just language, different names for the same things. Then I thought maybe it was just metric pricing. Then the whole checkout situation happened. Ah, she said, smiling. The self-checkout initiation. That machine challenged my character. She laughed again. They do that. No, but seriously, Marcus said. Everybody else looked so calm. Bring your own bag, scan your stuff, pack it yourself, tap your card, move on. No hesitation. No one acting like the store owed them a smoother emotional journey. She nodded slowly. That's probably part of it. What part? She shrugged lightly. I think here, shopping is more of a practical thing than a personalized experience. People don't really expect to be fussed over much. You grab what you need and get on with it. Marcus repeated that quietly. Get on with it. Yeah. He glanced down at the bag near his shoes. Back home, even a normal grocery trip can feel padded. Bigger packages, more promotions, more convenience built into every corner, more expectation that the store should make everything as easy and comfortable as possible. She smiled. That sounds exhausting. He laughed. Honestly, sometimes it is, but you stop noticing because it's normal. Exactly, she said. That's the thing. You only notice your own system once you leave it. Marcus looked at her with a little more focus now. Okay, that's exactly what today felt like. She nodded. Australian shopping's usually less performative, less of the customer is king energy, not rude, just less theatrical. He laughed at that. Less theatrical is perfect. Because that was it. He had been trying to name the feeling since the cereal aisle. The store wasn't unfriendly. The people weren't cold. If anything, everyone had been helpful in a brief, effortless kind of way. But nobody had wrapped that help in exaggerated politeness or over-explained anything to protect him from feeling mildly lost. Everything had the same quiet message. You'll be fine. Marcus smiled. Even the way people answer questions here is different. How? I'd ask something, and nobody gave me a speech. They'd just say, yeah, or pretty much, or you'll be right, and move on. She laughed. That's very us. At first I thought maybe people were being short with me. And now? Now I think it's confidence, like nobody thinks a small inconvenience is the end of the world. She pointed at him with her straw. Yes, That's much closer. A man passed by with 2 grocery bags hooked over one wrist and a loaf of bread sticking out from the top. He nodded briefly at the woman, and she nodded back. Then he kept walking. Marcus watched him go and said, "It also feels like people buy more normal amounts of stuff." She smiled. "Compared to the US? Way more normal." "What gave it away? The cracker box crisis?" He laughed. "That was part of it, yes. I kept looking for giant family-sized versions of everything, or some bulk option trying to convince me to buy 12 of one item for no reason." "Not as much of that," she said. "We've got bulk places in big chains too, obviously, but everyday shopping often feels a bit more restrained." "Restrained," Marcus said. "That's another good word." He thought back through the whole trip. Smaller packages, calmer sale signs, fewer loud discount claims, reusable bags treated like the default, self-checkout used without ceremony. Products arranged around use more than desire. The woman took a sip of her drink, then said, "A lot of it is just habit. You grow up knowing to bring your bags. You don't expect someone to bag your groceries for you. You don't really expect a massive amount of service unless you're somewhere that specifically offers it." Marcus nodded. "And nobody complains about that?" "Oh, people complain about everything," she said with a grin. "They're just less likely to act shocked that they have to participate." That got him. He laughed hard enough that a couple at the next table glanced over. "Okay," he said. "That might be the line of the day." She smiled. "It's true, though." For a moment, they both looked toward the supermarket entrance again. A woman came out carrying one bag and checking her phone. An older man pushed a trolley toward the parking lot. A teenager walked out with what looked like exactly one frozen pizza and a bottle of soda. Nobody lingered. Nobody made the moment bigger than it was. Marcus said, "It's weird. I thought shopping would tell me about products, but it feels more like it told me about public behavior." "Yeah," she said. "That sounds right too." He looked at her. "Like the shopping system only works because everyone agrees, mostly without talking, that they should do their bit. There you go. Bring a bag. Yep. Scan your stuff. Yep. Don't hold everyone up unless you really have to." She smiled. "Basically. And don't expect the store to turn an errand into a hospitality experience." "That as well." Marcus shook his head with a smile. "Wow." The woman laughed. "It's not some grand philosophy, it's just everyday culture." "Yeah, but everyday culture is the stuff you don't notice until you crash into it." That made her pause for a second. Then she nodded. "That's actually very true." For the first time since he sat down, Marcus realized he had stopped feeling embarrassed about the checkout. The whole thing had already shifted in his mind. 10 minutes ago, the self-checkout errors felt like proof that he was out of sync. Now they felt like the entry point into understanding why the whole store moved the way it did. He asked, "So what's the bigger rule then, if you had to sum it up?" She thought for a second, then said, "Probably that Australians like things practical, low fuss and fair. People don't want too much nonsense around ordinary life. If something works, it works. If everyone can do their small part, even better." Marcus repeated that in his head. Practical, low fuss, fair. It fit almost everything he had noticed. The packaging, the checkout, the way people answered questions, even the tone of the price tag somehow felt consistent with that. Less seduction, more function. He smiled. "That explains why the whole place felt quieter." "Yeah, not literally quieter. I know what you mean." "Back home," Marcus said, "retail can feel like it's trying to flatter you into spending more. Here it feels like the store assumes you're an adult who came for a reason." She laughed. "Honestly, that's a pretty good read." He lifted the reusable bag with one hand. "So this bag thing too?" She looked down at it. "Definitely. Once plastic bags got reduced and people got used to reusables, it just became standard. Most people don't think twice. I definitely thought twice." "Of course you did." "I had a full internal reaction. Like, wait, nobody's giving me a bag? I have to plan ahead?" She laughed. "And now?" Marcus looked at the bag for a second, then smiled. Now it kind of makes sense. It felt annoying for maybe 4 seconds, and then I realized the rest of the system was built around the assumption that everyone already knows this. Exactly. He leaned back again, more relaxed now. The confusion of the day was settling into something clearer. It wasn't that Australia had 1,000 strange shopping rules. It was that ordinary shopping revealed a country that seemed less interested in maximizing comfort at every tiny point of friction, and more comfortable expecting competent participation from everyone involved. That wasn't harsher, just different, and maybe, in its own way, more honest. Marcus stood up and adjusted the bag on his shoulder. "All right," he said. "I think I officially understand more than I did 20 minutes ago." The woman smiled. "Happy to help." He nodded toward the supermarket. "I came in for snacks and accidentally got a cultural briefing." "That's usually how it happens." He grinned. "One last question." "Sure." "Tim Tams. Worth the hype?" She looked at him like the answer was obvious. "Yes." Marcus laughed. "Okay, good. I needed one clear truth today." She laughed too, and he gave her a small wave before stepping away from the table. As he started walking down the shopping strip, the bag bumped lightly against his leg, and his mind replayed the whole afternoon in a different light. The labels had been funny. The self-checkout had been awkward. The reusable bag had caught him off guard. But underneath all of it was something steady and surprisingly coherent. Australians, he was beginning to realize, didn't seem to build everyday shopping around endless hand-holding, oversized convenience, or retail performance. They built it around the assumption that people would adapt, carry their part, and not make a normal errand heavier than it needed to be. And once that clicked, even the strange little details stopped feeling strange. They started feeling consistent. Marcus had planned to head straight back to his apartment after the supermarket. That had been the plan. Go in, buy food, survive the self-checkout, return home, eat something, and laugh about the whole thing later. Instead, he found himself still walking through the shopping strip with the reusable bag in one hand and the strange urge to keep observing. The grocery store had opened some kind of door in his mind. Now every storefront looked less like background and more like a clue. He slowed near a small bakery first. The window was full of meat pies, sausage rolls, slices, lamingtons, and a neat row of pastries that looked familiar enough to tempt him, and unfamiliar enough to require explanation. A handwritten sign in the glass advertised hot pies, fresh rolls, and iced coffee. He stepped inside. A woman behind the counter looked up and said, "Hey, how you going?" Marcus smiled automatically. "Good. Still learning, I think." She laughed lightly. "That bad, is it?" "Not bad," he said. "Just more educational than expected." He moved closer to the display and pointed. "Okay, I have to ask. Is a slice cake?" She leaned over the counter slightly. "Depends which one. That one's caramel slice, that one's vanilla slice." "So, dessert?" "Yeah." Marcus nodded. "All right, good start." Then he pointed to the pies. "And people really just grab one of these in the middle of the day? All the time?" "For lunch?" "Yeah." He smiled. "Wow." The woman gave him the kind of amused look he had been seeing all afternoon. Not judgmental, not overly interested either. Just a little entertained by the fact that something ordinary to her kept surprising him. "I'll try one," he said. "And maybe a lamington." She nodded. "Good choice." As she packed them, Marcus noticed something else. The interaction was warm, but it was direct. No scripted friendliness, no drawn-out recommendations, no upsell performance. She wasn't trying to become part of his day. She was just doing her job well, with enough personality to make it pleasant. He tapped his card, thanked her, and stepped back outside. He said to himself. It was the same feeling again. Not unfriendly, just uncluttered. He stood by a bench outside the bakery, took a bite of the pie, and immediately had to laugh. "Okay," he said quietly. "That is way better than it had any right to be." A man in a high-vis shirt sitting at the far end of the bench looked over and nodded toward the pastry. "Told you," he said. Marcus laughed. "You didn't tell me, but I accept the energy." The man grinned and went back to his drink. Marcus ate slowly, watching people drift between the pharmacy, the bakery, a discount store, and a fruit shop a few doors down. No one seemed rushed exactly, but no one seemed to wander aimlessly either. They moved like people doing errands, not performing lifestyle scenes. When he finished, he wiped his hands, picked up the grocery bag again, and wandered toward the fruit shop. This one felt different from the supermarket immediately. Narrow aisles, produce stacked in boxes, handwritten prices, a little radio playing softly somewhere near the back. He stepped inside and reached for a punnet of strawberries. Then he noticed the sign, cash preferred for small purchases. He smiled. Of course. A man arranging oranges looked up and said, "You right there, mate?" Marcus held up the strawberries. "Yeah, just noticing things." The man nodded like that made perfect sense. Marcus asked, "Do people still use cash a lot here?" The man gave a small shrug. "Some do. Card's fine. Just easier sometimes for small stuff." Marcus nodded. "Got it." He grabbed a few things and carried them to the counter. The total was simple. The exchange was short. Again, the feeling was the same. Functional, calm, human, but never wrapped in too much extra language. Outside, he glanced into a nearby pharmacy. Then he went in. Why not at this point? Inside, he expected the usual bright overload he associated with drugstores back home. Giant displays, seasonal clutter, candy everywhere, loyalty program signs trying to recruit him before he could even find toothpaste. Instead, the place felt tidier, less chaotic, more like a store built around useful things first and impulse temptations second. He stopped near the sunscreen section and looked at the shelves. Strong SPF everywhere, rows of practical products, very little of the glossy beach fantasy imagery he expected. A young employee nearby asked, "Need help finding anything?" Marcus smiled. "No, I'm okay, just comparing." Comparing what? He looked around and said, "Honestly, the whole vibe." That got a laugh. "You're not from here, hey?" "No, American." "Ah," the employee said, like that explained the sentence. Marcus pointed lightly toward the shelf. "Even this looks different. Back home, half this stuff would be marketed like it was a personality upgrade." The employee laughed. "Nah, here it's more like, don't get burnt." Marcus laughed too. "Yeah, that checks out." He wandered toward the front of the store, past a modest cosmetics section, then paused again. Even the way items were displayed seemed to match everything else he had felt all day. Less emotional persuasion, less fantasy, less pressure to transform yourself through purchasing. More simple logic. This is what it is. This is what it costs. Buy it if you need it. He stepped back outside and stood for a moment under the awning, looking up and down the strip. That was when the pattern fully sharpened. It wasn't about one supermarket. It wasn't about self-checkout. It wasn't about whether people said biscuits or cookies. It was the consistency. Every store he had entered that afternoon seemed to carry the same cultural tone in a slightly different accent. The bakery, the fruit shop, the pharmacy, even the discount store he only peeked into for 30 seconds. They all assumed a shopper who was paying attention, making practical choices, and not expecting to be dazzled every 5 feet. Marcus crossed into a small home goods shop next, mostly because the front display had reusable containers, clothes pegs, dish racks, and a chalkboard sign advertising storage specials. Inside, a woman near the register looked up and said, "Let me know if you need anything." "Thanks," Marcus said. He wandered through narrow aisles of baskets, towels, simple kitchen tools, and neatly arranged household stuff that all seemed designed to last longer than one impulsive season. No giant decorative slogans, no walls screaming about must-have hacks that would allegedly change his life. Just ordinary things presented as ordinary things. He picked up a sturdy lunch container and turned it over in his hand. The woman at the register called out, "Those are good." Marcus held it up. "Yeah, feels solid." She nodded. "People buy those for work lunches all the time." He smiled. "I'm starting to think this whole country is just better at treating everyday life like everyday life." She laughed. "That's one way to put it." He set the container down gently and said, mostly to himself, "Back home, Stores keep trying to make routine things feel exciting. She gave him a small shrug. Maybe here we save excitement for other stuff. He laughed. Honestly, fair. That line stayed with him after he left the shop. Maybe here we save excitement for other stuff. Because that was exactly the impression forming in his mind. Shopping in Australia, at least from what he had seen in one ordinary afternoon, didn't seem built around the idea that every errand needed to feel special. It wasn't trying to entertain him into spending. It wasn't coding normal tasks in 10 layers of stimulation. And the people matched that environment. Helpful, but brief. Friendly, but not intrusive. Competent, without making a performance out of competence. Even the smallest interactions carried that tone. A nod, a short answer, a quick joke. Then everyone moved on. The social energy felt lighter because nobody was trying to turn a 5-second exchange into a memorable customer journey. Marcus laughed under his breath as he kept walking. That might be it, he said. A teenager stepping past him glanced over, probably assuming he was on the phone. But Marcus wasn't talking to anyone now. He was stitching the day together in real time. The big signals had already happened. The self-checkout, the reusable bag, the quiet efficiency. But it was these smaller places that made the lesson harder to ignore. Once he saw the same assumptions repeated in different contexts, it stopped feeling accidental. Australian shopping, he was beginning to understand, reflected a wider public style. Do your part. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't expect too much ceremony around normal tasks. Be polite, but keep it moving. And weirdly, the more he noticed it, the more coherent it felt, even comforting in its own way. Because there was less noise, less pressure, less of that constant retail attempt to manipulate mood. He passed another convenience shop and looked through the window at drinks, snacks, newspapers, and a small fridge of sandwiches. Nothing dramatic, nothing trying too hard. Just another version of the same message in another format. By now, Marcus no longer felt like a tourist collecting funny differences. He felt like he was learning the emotional architecture of a place through its shelves, price tags, counters, and checkout habits. That realization made him smile. He adjusted the grocery bag in his hand and glanced down at the bakery bag tucked under his arm with the lamington still inside. What had started as a forgettable shopping trip had become something stranger and more interesting. Each small store had repeated the same lesson in a different voice until the larger meaning became impossible to miss. These weren't just store habits, they were cultural habits. And by the time Marcus turned toward home, he knew the day was heading toward one final realization. Shopping in Australia did not simply show him how Australians buy things. It showed him how Australians seem to move through ordinary life.